It all started when I discovered a small, flashing black lens perfectly concealed behind the bathroom vent. My brother had planted the listening device in my apartment, hacked my bank account, and monitored my every move. But the real nightmare began when I went to report it to the police. Instead of protecting me, my parents chose their golden boy. My father actually sent me a video of him throwing my belongings into the fire. They thought they had defeated me. They thought he had won. But they had no idea of the ultimate, humiliating destruction the universe was about to inflict upon him. Thank you for being here. Please grab a warm cup of water, sit down, and listen to me tell the whole story. Growing up, my house never truly felt like a home. It felt much more like a corporate boardroom where affection was entirely conditional, measured strictly by your latest achievements, your grades, and eventually your salary. My name is of no real consequence now, mostly because I have spent the last several years completely reinventing who I am from the ground up. But to understand how my entire life was systematically burned to the ground by the very people who were supposed to protect me, you need to understand the toxic, deeply ingrained dynamic of my family. I am a man in my early 20s. I am a visual arts major who has always preferred a quiet, simple life. I spend my days sketching charcoal landscapes, building a design portfolio, and keeping my head down. I like minding my own business. I have never asked my parents for a handout. My older brother, David, was the exact polar opposite. David was the golden child, the impossible standard by which every single one of my perceived failures was brutally measured. He is a computer engineer in his late 20s, and to call him driven would be the understatement of the century. He is the kind of guy who wakes up at 5 in the morning every single day, goes for a punishing 10-mile run in the freezing rain, drinks a protein shake that smells like wet dirt, and then spends the rest of his waking hours reminding everyone around him exactly how productive and superior he is. He is intensely type A. He is a brutal, unforgiving perfectionist who pushes himself to the absolute brink and fully expects everyone else in his orbit to do the exact same thing. In the traditional, financial sense, he was wildly successful. He had a massive six-figure salary. He had just landed a massive promotion at a prestigious tech firm, and my parents treated him like a living, breathing deity. To my deeply conservative, appearance-obsessed parents, David was the ultimate return on their investment. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas dinner, every Sunday afternoon phone call was dominated by the topic of David. They constantly bragged about him to their friends at the country club and their congregation at church. They boasted loudly about how the massive college fund they had poured into his education had shaped him into a titan of industry. They looked at him and saw their own legacy secured. Me? I was the black sheep, the disappointment. My parents tolerated my art, but they never, ever respected it. To them, art was a mildly amusing hobby you do on a Sunday afternoon, not a way for a grown man to make a living and secure a future. And David made sure to remind me of that glaring difference every single chance he got. He had an overblown ego and a god complex that could fill a football stadium. He was the kind of deeply arrogant guy who watched the movie Fight Club and entirely missed the point, genuinely thinking Tyler Durden was a genius role model rather than a cautionary tale. Our relationship was built entirely on a foundation of simmering, passive-aggressive hostilities. He deeply resented the fact that I didn't want to be exactly like him. I didn't ask for his unsolicited advice on the stock market. I didn't care about his expensive new tech gadgets, and I flat out refused to let him dictate the terms of my life. Whenever we had a family dinner, the routine was always the same. He would corner me in the kitchen or the living room. He would grab my private sketchbook off the counter without asking, flip through my deeply personal drawings with a condescending, tight-lipped smirk, and tell me I was wasting my potential. He literally had the step-by-step, multi-year plan drawn up in his head for me. He wanted me to drop my art major immediately, switch to an engineering degree, and let him completely mold me into a miniature, obedient version of himself. When he brought it up, my jaw would clench so hard my teeth ached. I would tell him firmly to back off and mind his own business. He would just laugh. It was that arrogant, sharp, dismissive laugh of his, and he would call me soft. It usually ended with me going extremely low contact with him for weeks at a time, until my mother would inevitably guilt-trip me into answering his calls again to keep the peace. Keep the peace. That was my family's absolute favorite phrase. It basically meant I had to swallow my pride, ignore my boundaries, and let David walk all over me so he could feel superior and my parents could pretend we were a perfect, happy family. If I ever pushed back too hard, my father would casually threaten to write me out of whatever meager inheritance was left after David took his lion's share. I genuinely thought he was just an overbearing, narcissistic jerk. I thought he was just an arrogant older brother who desperately needed to feel important and in control. I had absolutely no idea that beneath that polished, successful, wealthy exterior was a deeply disturbed, controlling monster who viewed me not as an independent human being, but as a piece of property he needed to manage. The warning signs were all there, flashing bright red, but I ignored them. I assumed my quiet life in my small, off-campus apartment in California was entirely my own. I paid my own rent with a grueling part-time job and a few academic scholarships. I bought my own cheap groceries. I had my own laptop, my own small circle of friends, my own private world. I was completely, blissfully oblivious to the terrifying fact that the walls of my privacy had already been completely torn down. David wasn't just criticizing my life from afar anymore. He was walking around inside it. He was wearing muddy boots in my mind, examining every single piece of my private existence. And the truly terrifying part is, his twisted brain genuinely believed he had the absolute right to do it. The nightmare didn't start with a massive explosion or a dramatic confrontation. It started with a simple phone call on a random, rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my small, scratched kitchen table, eating a cheap turkey sandwich, listening to David ramble on speakerphone about the incompetent junior developers on his latest corporate project. I usually just put the phone down, let him talk at me, and hummed in agreement while I worked on my art. Then he made a joke. It was a throwaway, sarcastic comment, meant to be witty and cutting. He made a highly specific, mocking remark about a digital drawing I had been working on for the past 3 days. It was a dark, brooding, charcoal-style sketch of a broken clock tower surrounded by dead trees. My hand froze entirely over my drawing tablet. The stylus slipped from my fingers and clattered loudly against the plastic desk. I felt a cold, sharp chill wash directly down the back of my neck, raising the hairs on my arms. I had never posted that drawing anywhere. I hadn't uploaded it to any public forum. I hadn't saved it to any shared cloud service. I hadn't emailed it to a professor. I hadn't even shown it to my closest friends. It existed purely and solely on the local hard drive of my physical laptop, which was sitting exactly 3 feet away from me. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice suddenly sounding tight, thin, and entirely unrecognizable to my own ears. He casually brushed the question off, seamlessly transitioning back to complaining about the lease on his new luxury car. But my heart was suddenly pounding violently against my ribs, a heavy, frantic rhythm. After I quickly made an excuse and hung up the phone, I sat in absolute, suffocating silence in my empty apartment, staring blankly at my glowing laptop screen. My mind raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour, desperately trying to find a logical, rational explanation. Maybe he saw it over my shoulder the last time he visited my apartment a month ago? No, that was impossible. I literally started drawing the clock tower 3 days ago. Then another memory hit me like a physical punch straight to the gut. A week prior, David had made a weird, offhanded, mocking comment about a guy I knew from one of my art history classes. In his mocking comment, David used a very specific, unique phrasing. It was the exact word-for-word phrase I had used to describe that guy in a private, direct message to my best friend on Discord. A completely private, encrypted, secure chat that no one else in the world had access to. I felt a sudden, violent wave of nausea hit the back of my throat. My hands physically shook as I pulled my laptop closer. I know very little about the deep technical side of computers. I am an artist, not a software engineer. But I knew how to use Google, and I knew when I was being hunted. I immediately downloaded the strongest version of Malwarebytes I could find, running a deep, full system scan. I sat there sweating profusely, my knee bouncing nervously against the desk, watching the green progress bar crawl agonizingly across the screen. After 45 minutes, the result popped up. Came up completely clean. 0 threats found. No viruses. No Trojans. I exhaled a long, shaky breath. Maybe I was just losing my mind. Maybe the stress of midterms and working late shifts was causing me to hallucinate connections that weren't there. But the heavy, sinking gut feeling wouldn't leave me alone. My instincts were screaming at me to keep digging. I logged into my primary Gmail account, clicked on the security settings, and navigated to the recent login activity page. My stomach dropped completely into my shoes. The blood rushed from my head, leaving me dizzy. There it was, staring back at me in black and white text. An unfamiliar IP address, tied to a completely different computer model and a location 3 towns over, had been logging into my personal email multiple times a day, every single day, for the past week. I quickly checked my mobile banking app. Same exact thing. I checked my university student portal. Same thing. Someone had been casually walking through the most sensitive, private corridors of my digital life like they had the master keys to the building. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed David's number. My blood was absolutely boiling with a rage I had never felt before, but beneath that blinding anger was a thick, heavy, suffocating layer of pure terror. He picked up on the second ring, sounding utterly relaxed. "Did you hack my computer?" I demanded, not bothering with a greeting, my voice trembling violently with raw rage. There was a brief, heavy pause on the line. I could hear him breathing. Then he laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh caught off guard. It was a booming, genuine, deeply amused chuckle. "Hack is such an ugly, dramatic word, little brother," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension. "I simply set up some standard remote access protocols to your laptop the last time I was visiting your apartment. I'm just keeping a close eye on things." I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling the room spin. "You what? You secretly installed remote access to my personal computer? Are you completely insane? Calm down and stop being so emotional." He sighed loudly, sounding genuinely annoyed that I wasn't appreciating his brilliant intervention. "You're disorganized. You're wasting your potential on these stupid drawings. I told you repeatedly, I have a plan for you. I need to closely monitor your progress to make sure you aren't throwing your life away. Honestly, people today have absolutely no reasonable expectation of privacy anyway. You should be on your knees thanking me for caring enough to intervene. I noticed you haven't been checking your class schedule regularly, so I went ahead and made sure to set up some calendar reminders for you." I gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned stark white. I couldn't pull enough air into my lungs. "You're reading my private messages. You're actively looking at my bank account. You're watching my art in real time. I have access to absolutely everything," he stated firmly, laying it out as a simple, undeniable, objective fact of life. "Every single file, every private chat, every password you type. It is entirely for your own good. Someone in this family has to mentor you before you end up on the street." I slammed my thumb down on the screen, ending the call instantly. I shoved myself violently away from the table, my wooden chair scraping loudly against the cheap linoleum floor. The reality crashed down on me, suffocating me. He had everything. My bank account, my school records, my art, my deepest, most private conversations with my friends. The sacred boundaries of my entire life had been completely erased by a man who honestly believed he owned me. I didn't pack a bag. I just threw my contaminated laptop into my backpack, grabbed my car keys, and sprinted out the door. I didn't feel safe breathing the air in my own home. I ran down the street, my chest heaving, until I reached the massive university library. I scanned my ID, rushed past the front desk, and found the darkest, most isolated corner down in the basement archives, surrounded by tall shelves of dusty reference books. I sat there in the dead silence, staring at the black canvas backpack at my feet, terrified of the machine inside it, realizing that my own flesh and blood had effectively turned my life into his own sick, personal reality television show. I sat completely frozen in that dim library basement for 6 agonizing hours. I didn't dare unzip my backpack. I didn't touch my laptop. I just sat there in the hard wooden chair, my mind spiraling violently through 100 different worst-case scenarios. Using a public, monitored library computer terminal, I frantically changed the passwords to my bank, my email, and my university student portal. But even as I typed the new characters, I knew deep down it was nothing more than a flimsy band-aid on a gaping bullet wound. If he had deeply embedded remote access software running in the background, he could easily capture the new keystrokes the absolute second I reconnected my machine to the internet. Eventually, the library announced it was closing. I had to leave. I needed to go back to my apartment. I needed clean clothes for my shift tomorrow. I needed my physical textbooks, and I needed to sleep. But the mere thought of turning the key and walking through that front door made my skin crawl with physical revulsion. He had been monitoring my computer seamlessly. But what else had he done? What else was he capable of? He had been inside my apartment, entirely alone, for over 3 hours last month while I was stuck working a grueling double shift at the coffee shop. I walked back to my apartment building just as the streetlights began to flicker on. The narrow hallway outside my door smelled like cheap lemon bleach and old, damp carpet, a smell I usually found mildly comforting. Tonight it felt like walking into a cage. I slid the key into the lock, turning it as quietly as possible, and stepped inside. The apartment was pitch black and dead silent. I didn't reach for the light switch. I let my eyes adjust to the darkness leaking in from the street lamps outside. I started my search in the living room. My hands were shaking so badly I knocked over a stack of magazines. I checked behind the cheap television. I stood on a chair and inspected the plastic casing of the smoke detector. I pulled every book off the bookshelves, checking the hollow spaces behind them. Nothing. I moved into my small bedroom, aggressively tearing the sheets and blankets off my mattress, shining my phone flashlight under the bed, looking behind the cheap canvas artwork I had pinned to the drywall. Absolutely nothing. I started to feel foolish, rubbing my exhausted eyes. I was letting my rampant paranoia get the best of me. He was an arrogant corporate hacker, I told myself, not an international spy. Then, feeling defeated, I walked into the bathroom. It was a tiny, cramped, windowless space. I stood directly in front of the scratched mirror, turning on the harsh overhead vanity light, splashing freezing cold water onto my pale face, desperately telling myself to get a grip on reality. As I blindly reached to my right for a hand towel, my eyes naturally drifted upward toward the small, square exhaust vent set high on the wall, directly over the shower and the toilet. It was dusty, a standard, cheap plastic grate covered in lint. But there was something fundamentally wrong with the bottom left corner. One of the plastic slats looked slightly bent, pushed aside just a fraction of an inch to create a wider gap. I closed the toilet lid, stepped up onto the porcelain seat, balancing myself carefully, and grabbed my phone. I turned the flashlight app to its brightest setting. Holding my breath, I shined the harsh, blinding white beam directly through the dusty, bent plastic slats of the vent. My breath instantly caught and locked in my throat. My peripheral vision tunneled until all I could see was the vent. Tucked neatly behind the plastic grate, held firmly in place with a thick piece of black electrical tape, was a small, square, metallic device. The light from my phone bounced off a tiny, perfectly round glass lens, reflecting directly back into my eyes. A minuscule blue LED light blinked slowly, rhythmically, in the shadows. It was a camera, positioned perfectly, pointed directly at the shower stall, pointed directly at the toilet. I stumbled backward in sheer horror, my foot slipping off the wet toilet seat. I crashed backward into the heavy wooden bathroom door, hitting the floor hard, but the adrenaline surging through my veins entirely masked the pain. I scrambled backward into the hallway on my hands and knees, my chest heaving violently, gasping for air as if I had just been dragged underwater. I dry heaved over the carpet, my stomach violently rejecting the horrific, sickening reality of what I had just discovered. My brother, my own flesh and blood, the man I grew up with. He hadn't just breached the digital walls of my life. He had completely, utterly violated my most intimate, vulnerable, physical space. He had watched me, The paralyzing fear instantly evaporated, replaced entirely by a blinding, white-hot, furious rage. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't touch my computer. I marched straight out of the apartment, slamming the door behind me, got into my beat-up car, and drove well over the speed limit directly to the local police precinct. The station lobby was brightly lit, smelling strongly of stale coffee and industrial floor wax. I walked straight up to the thick bulletproof glass partition, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ground together. My hands were shaking so violently I had to grip the metal counter to keep myself upright. I looked the tired desk sergeant dead in the eye. "I need to report a severe crime," I said, my voice surprisingly loud and steady. My older brother hacked all of my personal electronics, and I just found a hidden recording device wired inside the vent in my bathroom. The next few hours were an exhausting blur of repeating my story, answering invasive questions, and signing endless forms. 2 uniformed officers accompanied me back to my apartment. I stood trembling in the hallway while they went into the bathroom with a toolkit. When they emerged 10 minutes later, holding the small black camera sealed inside a clear plastic evidence bag, the absolute reality of the situation finally crashed over me like a wave. It wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. It was real. I didn't sleep a single second that night. I sat in a brightly lit, 24-hour diner down the street, nursing a cup of bitter black coffee until the sun finally came up. The very next morning, the police escorted me to the county courthouse. I sat down with a legal advocate who helped me rush file the massive stack of paperwork. Because of the physical evidence, the judge didn't hesitate. By noon, I was holding a signed temporary restraining order, a strict injunction. David was legally barred from contacting me, coming within 500 feet of me, or attempting to access any of my digital property. The police informed me they had opened an active, serious investigation into the cyberstalking and the hidden camera, which carried potential federal weight. I walked out of the heavy glass doors of the courthouse feeling a strange, hollow mix of total exhaustion and undeniable triumph. I had finally stood up for myself. I had drawn a hard, legal line in the sand. I assumed the justice system would work quickly. I assumed my parents, once they heard the undeniable truth and saw the official police reports, would be horrified and rally behind me. I assumed this was the end of the nightmare. I was so incredibly, stupidly naive. I didn't realize the actual war hadn't even started yet. The fragile illusion of safety I had built for myself shattered exactly 4 hours after David was legally served with the restraining order at his corporate office. I was sitting on the worn fabric couch in my friend's living room. I absolutely refused to go back to my apartment, when my cell phone buzzed aggressively against the coffee table. The screen lit up with an unknown number. I let it ring out to voicemail. 2 minutes later, another unknown number popped up, then another. I unlocked my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, and listened to the first voicemail message. It was David. His voice wasn't smooth, confident, or arrogant anymore. It was chaotic, frantic, and dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "You think a stupid little piece of paper stops me?" He hissed into the phone, his breathing heavy. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my colleagues like this? You are absolutely nothing without me. You're a pathetic, starving artist playing the victim card. I am going to ruin your miserable life. I am going to dismantle every single thing you have." He chose to immediately, blatantly, and aggressively violate a strict court order within hours of receiving it. His massive ego simply could not comprehend or accept the fact that I had successfully defied his control. I didn't hesitate or try to reason with him. I immediately called the detective handling my active case, played the voicemail over the phone, and forwarded the audio file directly to her inbox. By 8 o'clock that evening, David was officially arrested. According to the detective, they pulled him out of his high-rise luxury apartment, put him in handcuffs, and threw him into a holding cell for the night. He was facing immediate misdemeanor charges for violating the injunction, which would sit right alongside the far more serious pending federal implications of the hacking and the hidden camera. Sitting on that couch, I felt a brief, powerful surge of relief wash over my exhausted body. He was literally behind bars. He couldn't hurt me tonight. The system was actually protecting me. Then, exactly 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID wasn't blocked. The screen clearly displayed Mom. I answered the phone instantly, my heart aching with a desperate, childlike need. I needed my mom right now. I needed my parents to tell me they loved me, that they were horrified by the monstrous things their eldest son had done, that they were driving down to get me and make sure I was safe. Mom! I whispered, my voice cracking under the emotional weight of the last 48 hours. You disgusting, ungrateful little liar, she screamed into the receiver. The sheer volume, the absolute hatred, and the raw disgust in her voice were like physical blows. I violently flinched, pulling the phone away from my ear. Mom, wait. Please just listen to me. I will not listen to another word from you, she shrieked, her voice echoing in my quiet room. Do you have any idea what you've just done? The police came to David's office. They dragged him out in handcuffs in front of his boss. You are actively ruining his career. You are trying to destroy his entire life simply because you're a failure and you're jealous of him. Jealous? I yelled back, the dam finally breaking as hot tears spilled over my cheeks. He put a hidden camera in my bathroom vent. Mom, the police found it. They took it in an evidence bag. He hacked my bank account. He was trying to help you. You idiot. My father's deep, booming voice suddenly erupted over the speakerphone. He had been listening on the other line the entire time. You are completely out of control. You're failing at life, you have no future, and your brother generously stepped up to guide you. And exactly how do you repay him? By running to the cops and making up psychotic, dramatic lies about cameras to ruin his reputation. It's not a lie. I have the police report. The police have the physical camera. I screamed, my throat burning raw, begging them to hear the truth. I do not care, my father roared back. The absolute, unshakable conviction in his voice stopped my heart dead in my chest. I don't care if there was a camera. I don't care what he did. He is your brother. You do not ever call the cops on your own family. You have shamed us. You have ruined this family's name. You are not welcome in our home ever again. As far as we are concerned, you are no longer our son. Click. The line went dead. I sat completely paralyzed on my friend's couch, the phone slipping from my numb fingers and tumbling onto the floor. They didn't care. They literally openly admitted they did not care that my brother had committed a severe, perverted, violating crime against me. In their deeply twisted eyes, the only actual crime committed was me exposing their perfect, high-salary golden boy to the public. Their obsession with their pristine image, their absolute worship of David's success and money, had completely blinded them to his monstrous behavior. I honestly thought that was the absolute rock bottom. I thought being verbally disowned and abandoned by my own parents in my darkest hour was the worst pain a human being could possibly feel. But the very next morning, my father made absolutely sure to twist the knife until the blade broke off entirely inside my chest. I woke up on the couch to a video message sent directly from my dad's cell phone number. I opened the message with trembling hands, dreading what I was about to see. The shaky cell phone video showed my parents' large suburban backyard. My father was standing directly next to a large, rusted metal burn barrel. Bright orange flames were licking aggressively up over the top edge, sending thick black smoke into the sky. My mother was standing rigidly in the background, her arms crossed, her face set in absolute stone. Since you want to act like a complete stranger and call the cops on your family, you don't need to keep your trash in our house anymore, my father said directly to the camera, his face twisted in an ugly, hateful sneer. He reached down to the grass and picked up an armful of items. I recognized them instantly, and a sob caught in my throat. It was my stuff, the personal things I had safely left behind in my childhood bedroom when I moved out. He casually threw my old, signed high school yearbooks directly into the fire. He reached down again, picked up my favorite childhood baseball glove, the exact one we used to play catch with in that very yard before David became the only son that mattered, and tossed it into the flames without flinching. Then, he picked up a thick stack of my old sketchbooks, years and years of my early artwork and memories, and violently shoved them down into the roaring fire with a metal pitchfork. "We are done with you," he spat aggressively at the camera, before the video abruptly cut to black. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't even cry anymore. I just sat there in absolute, crushing, deafening silence. The people who gave me life, the people who were biologically wired to protect me, had just watched my abuser torture me, and then actively decided to join in on the fun. They had literally burned my past to ashes, and in doing so, they fully intended to burn my future. Because when I finally tried to pull myself together a few agonizing days later to get a new job so I could afford to move to a safe apartment, I realized a massive, fatal flaw in my desperate escape plan. When I fled my apartment that first night, I didn't grab my essential legal documents. My birth certificate, my passport, my social security card. They were all securely locked inside a heavy fireproof safe located in my parents' master bedroom closet. I desperately needed those exact documents to pass a background check for a job. I needed them to completely close and change my compromised bank accounts. I legally needed them to exist and function in society. I sent a text message to my father, swallowing every last ounce of pride and dignity I had left, practically begging him to simply put my legal documents in an envelope and mail them to me. His response came back 10 minutes later. It was a single, chilling line of text. "I don't know what documents you're talking about. I think they might have accidentally fallen into the fire. They had completely, masterfully trapped me. They had cut off my family support, publicly destroyed my cherished belongings, and were now actively holding my legal identity hostage, trying to financially starve me into submission. They wanted me to hit rock bottom. They wanted me to crawl back to their house on my hands and knees, apologize profusely to David, drop the police charges, and accept my permanent place as his obedient, silent punching bag." I was completely and utterly alone in the world. The severe depression hit me like a runaway freight train. I couldn't sleep, terrified that David would quickly bail out of jail and find a way to post my private information online, or that his aggressive friends would show up at my friend's door. I completely stopped eating. I became grossly thin, my skin pale and sickly. I was forced to officially drop out of my university classes, losing my scholarships, because I couldn't focus on absolutely anything other than the suffocating, crushing weight of my own deliberately ruined life. I was a young man, completely isolated, systematically stripped of my legal identity, and hiding in fear, while the very people who conspired to destroy me slept completely soundly in their expensive beds. The following months were a brutal, agonizing masterclass in how completely a human being can be systematically dismantled by the very people who share their blood. It was not just that my parents abandoned me. That would have been painful, but I could have survived simple abandonment. No, they actively hunted me. They launched a highly coordinated, ruthless smear campaign designed specifically to protect their perfect golden boy from the social consequences of his own perverted crimes. Because I did not have my physical birth certificate or my social security card, I was completely paralyzed in the real world. I was sleeping on a lumpy, uncomfortable futon in my friend's cramped living room, jumping out of my skin at every single shadow, and constantly staring at a cell phone that only ever delivered bad news. My parents didn't just burn my cherished childhood belongings in that metal barrel. They methodically burned my reputation to the ground. They personally reached out to every single extended family member, every old family friend, and every prominent member of their large church congregation. They spun a completely fabricated, wildly dramatic story to cover David's tracks. They told everyone that I had suffered a severe, violent mental breakdown. They claimed I was deeply unstable, completely delusional, and that I had completely fabricated the entire story about the hidden camera to extort money from David. They told people I was insanely jealous of his massive salary and the prestige of his recent corporate promotion. And the absolute worst part of it all? People actually believed them. David was the highly successful tech engineer. He wore the expensive tailored suits, he drove the luxury car, and he had that confident, winning smile that older people absolutely loved. I was the broke, struggling visual arts student living in a cheap off-campus apartment with paint on my jeans. To the outside world, my parents' lie made perfect, logical sense. Why would a wealthy, successful professional risk his entire lucrative career to spy on his younger brother? It didn't make sense to them, so they immediately chose the easier narrative. They chose to believe the black sheep had finally gone completely crazy. The harassment started slowly, but it escalated with terrifying, aggressive speed. I started getting phone calls from unlisted numbers at all hours of the night. At first, it was just heavy, intimidating breathing on the other end of the line. Then, the actual voices started. People I had known since I was a little kid, people who used to come over for Sunday barbecues and holiday parties, were calling me to call me a liar, a sociopath, and a complete disgrace to my family name. One of my aunts called and told me I was going to burn in hell for trying to ruin David's life. I had to physically block dozens of numbers every single day, but they just kept finding new ways to reach me. They wanted to punish me. The daily stress was physically eating me alive. I couldn't hold down any solid food. My stomach was in a constant, tight knot. I lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks. My clothes hung off my frame like cheap rags. My eyes had deep, dark purple circles under them from lack of sleep. I looked exactly like the sick, unstable, crazy person my parents were telling everyone I was. But the absolute, crushing blow came directly from the justice system. I had placed all my faith in the police. I had the physical camera evidence. I had the threatening voicemails saved on my phone. I honestly thought it was a completely open and shut case. But I was incredibly naive about how the world actually works when a wealthy person hires a ruthless, expensive lawyer. David's defense lawyer was an absolute shark. He completely tore my case apart in the preliminary hearings with terrifying efficiency. He smoothly argued to the judge that the remote access software on my computer was installed with my explicit verbal consent months ago for routine, maintenance purposes. As for the camera carefully hidden in the bathroom vent, his lawyer brought in a highly paid technical expert who confidently claimed that because the camera was a cheap, generic brand bought with cash, there was absolutely zero definitive digital footprint proving David was the one who physically placed it there. They aggressively argued that because I lived in a cheap off-campus apartment building with a landlord, maintenance workers, and previous tenants who all had keys, literally anyone could have put it there. They created reasonable doubt out of thin air. The local prosecutor handling my case was completely overwhelmed with violent felony crimes and simply didn't have the time, the manpower, or the budget to fight a protracted, expensive legal battle over a misdemeanor invasion of privacy charge. They quietly offered David a plea deal. He didn't serve a single day in a jail cell. He received a minor fine that equated to maybe a week of his massive salary, and he was placed on standard, unsupervised probation. The tech firm he worked for did initially fire him when the embarrassing arrest happened, but his lawyer actively pulled strings behind the scenes. Within a single month, David was quietly hired by a smaller, highly lucrative private tech company owned by a close personal friend of my father. He actually ended up making more money than he did before the arrest. I was sitting on that lumpy futon, staring blankly at the stained carpet, when my legal advocate called to tell me about the plea deal. I felt completely hollowed out. There was no grand justice. There was no public vindication. The bad guy won. He completely, cleanly got away with it. To make matters infinitely worse, I saw the photographic proof of his victory the very next week. A mutual friend from my hometown, who hadn't blocked me on social media yet, posted a large public photo album. It was a picture of my parents, David, and his new girlfriend. They were standing on the sun-drenched, pristine wood deck of a massive luxury cruise ship in Hawaii. They were all wearing bright floral leis, holding tropical drinks and coconuts, and smiling radiantly into the camera. They were celebrating his new job. They were celebrating their absolute victory over me. I looked at that picture of my family smiling in the warm Hawaiian sun, and then I looked down at my own shaking, painfully thin, pale hands. I was completely trapped. I had exactly $30 left in my checking account. I couldn't get a new job without my social security number. I couldn't enroll in a different school. I was a literal ghost in my own life. I hit absolute rock bottom. I spent days staring at the ceiling, genuinely wishing I would just stop waking up. The depression was a heavy, suffocating lead blanket that I couldn't push off my chest. They had successfully destroyed me, and they didn't even have to break a sweat to do it. I stayed completely buried in that dark, miserable pit for nearly a month. I barely left my friend's living room. I stopped showering regularly. I stopped sketching completely. Every single time I looked at a charcoal pencil, it made me physically sick to my stomach, instantly reminding me of David's mocking, condescending voice. I was actively letting them win. I was slowly fading away into absolutely nothing, exactly like they wanted me to. But then, something finally shifted inside my brain. It wasn't a sudden, cinematic burst of magical inspiration. It was a slow, quiet realization born out of pure, unadulterated, stubborn anger. I woke up one morning, dragged myself into the bathroom, and looked at my hollow, dark-circled eyes in the mirror. I saw a victim staring back at me, and suddenly, I felt a tiny, hot spark of pure rage ignite deep in my chest. Why was I the one hiding? Why was I the one starving on a borrowed couch while the man who violated my privacy and hacked my life was drinking expensive cocktails on a luxury cruise ship? That anger was the absolute best thing that could have happened to me. It gave me immediate burning fuel. I realized that sitting around waiting for the universe to hand me justice was a completely useless, pathetic strategy. If I wanted my life back, I had to physically take it back from them with my own two hands. I couldn't rely on the police, I couldn't rely on my family, and I couldn't rely on the broken legal system. I only had myself. My very first, absolutely critical mission was reclaiming my legal identity. Without my government documents, I was nothing. I spent hours at the public library, aggressively researching the exact, painfully specific bureaucratic steps required to replace a social security card and a birth certificate when you have zero secondary identification. It was an absolute, terrifying nightmare of government red tape. I found out I needed a certified medical record or a stamp school transcript to prove my identity to the county vital records office. I put on my worn-out sneakers and walked 3 miles in the freezing rain to my university's registrar office. I stood dripping wet at the wooden counter and calmly explained my situation to the older woman working there. Her name tag said Margaret. She had kind, tired eyes and reminded me of the mother I used to have before everything went dark. I didn't give her the dramatic, bloody details of the camera and the hacking. I just told her my family had maliciously destroyed my documents and I was desperately trying to start over. For the first time in months, someone actually looked at me with genuine human empathy. Margaret didn't ask invasive questions. She didn't judge my wet clothes or my thin frame. She simply nodded, typed rapidly on her keyboard, and printed out a fully certified, officially stamped copy of my university transcript and my student ID profile. She slipped it into a crisp manila envelope and handed it to me. "Good luck, honey," she said softly, offering a sad smile. "Don't let them keep you down." That small, simple act of kindness completely broke me. I cried in the empty hallway of the administration building, but they were hot tears of profound relief. I finally had a piece of ammunition. Armed with that certified transcript, I took a 2-hour, bumpy bus ride to the County Vital Records office the very next morning. I waited in a hard plastic chair in a crowded room for 4 agonizing hours. When my number was finally called, I presented my case to the clerk. It took 3 different supervisors, a lot of explaining and verifying my student records, but by the absolute end of the day, I walked out of those heavy glass doors holding a newly printed, officially certified copy of my birth certificate. 2 weeks later, utilizing the new birth certificate and my certified school records, my brand new social security card arrived in the mail at my friend's apartment. Holding those small, fragile pieces of paper in my hands felt exactly like holding a winning lottery ticket. They weren't just government documents. They were the physical keys to my absolute freedom. They represented the undeniable fact that I was officially a recognized human being again. I didn't need my parents. I didn't need their permission to exist or their money to survive. The very next day, I walked into a busy local diner down the street and applied for a job as a line cook. The manager took one look at me and hired me on the spot. It wasn't glamorous. It was incredibly hard, sweaty, exhausting, back-breaking work. I stood over a hot grill for 10 hours a day. I came home smelling like old grease and burnt onions every single night, my feet aching terribly and my hands covered in small burns and blisters. But I didn't care at all. Every single paycheck I deposited into my newly secured, heavily protected bank account was a massive, undeniable victory against my family. I saved every single penny I made. I stopped eating out completely. I bought my clothes at cheap thrift stores. I lived like a disciplined monk for 6 straight months. And during those 6 months, I completely and utterly severed the final, lingering ties to my past. I walked into a cell phone provider, completely canceled my old phone number, and bought a cheap prepaid phone with a brand new, unlisted number. I aggressively deleted every single social media account I had ever created. I vanished completely from the digital world. As far as my family and their toxic church friends were concerned, I had simply dropped off the face of the earth. When I finally saved up exactly $3,000 in cash, I packed my few belongings into 2 canvas duffel bags. I hugged my friend tightly, thanking him for keeping me off the cold streets when I had nothing, and I got on a Greyhound bus heading east. I was finally leaving California. I was leaving the state where my parents lived, the state where David worked, the state where my entire life had been burned down. I stared out the dirty, smudged window of the bus as we crossed the state line, watching the familiar landscape disappear behind me. I felt a massive, heavy weight physically lift off my chest. The black sheep was finally gone, and he was never coming back. I ended up settling in a quiet, incredibly affordable Midwestern state. It was a place where absolutely nobody knew my name, nobody knew my history, and nobody cared about the dramatic, vicious rumors my family had spread back on the coast. The air felt cleaner here. The streets felt safer. The people actually smiled at you when you walked into a grocery store. Rebuilding an entire human life from absolute scratch is incredibly lonely at first. For the first few months, my entire existence consisted of my small, bare studio apartment, a cheap mattress on the floor, and the new job I managed to land. Because I finally had my legal documents and a clean background check, I applied for a junior graphic design position at a local, mid-sized advertising agency. It wasn't the fine arts career I had originally dreamed of when I was drawing charcoal landscapes, but it was creative, steady work. When they called to offer me the job, they quoted a starting salary that was genuinely more money than I had ever made in my entire life. It was enough to easily pay my rent, buy decent groceries without checking the price tags, and finally start saving for a real future. Having a stable, safe, predictable routine was the exact medicine my shattered nervous system desperately needed. But the deep trauma of what my brother had done to me was still heavily rooted in my brain. For a long time, I couldn't take a shower without staring intensely at the bathroom vent, terrified I would see a blinking blue light. I couldn't open my laptop without a sharp spike of anxiety hitting my chest. The lingering paranoia was an incredibly difficult ghost to shake. So, my therapist helped me understand a brutal but necessary truth. I was entirely mourning the loss of a family that never actually existed in the first place. I was mourning an illusion. My parents were never going to be the supportive, loving protectors I desperately wanted them to be. They were deeply broken, shallow people who valued public status over their own child's safety. And David was a dangerous, calculating predator masquerading as a successful professional. Understanding that their horrific actions were a reflection of their own profound sickness, and absolutely not a reflection of my worth, was the key that finally unlocked my mental prison. As I healed internally, my external life began to beautifully flourish. I slowly started sketching again. Not dark, brooding charcoal drawings of broken towers and dead trees, but vibrant, colorful landscapes and bright character designs. I found my passion again. I also started pushing myself to meet new people. I joined a local weekend hiking group. I started attending a weekly figure drawing class at a community center downtown. Slowly but surely, I began to build a new circle of friends. One of them, a guy named Marcus who worked as a mechanic, completely changed my view on trust. These were people who liked me simply for who I was. They didn't care about my earning potential, they didn't judge my career choices, and they never, ever tried to control me. We would have loud, chaotic potluck dinners on Friday nights, sitting around my small kitchen table, eating cheap pizza and laughing until our ribs physically ached. When my beat-up car got a flat tire in the snow, Marcus and 2 other friends showed up within 20 minutes with a jack and hot coffee to help me fix it. When I was sick with the flu, one of them dropped off hot soup and medicine at my door without me even asking. I looked around my living room one evening, completely surrounded by these loud, funny, deeply kind people, and a profound, life-altering realization washed over me. This was my family. Blood does not automatically make someone your family. Blood is just a random biological accident. Real family is entirely about mutual respect, absolute safety, and unconditional support. I had spent 20 years trying to force a square peg into a round hole, begging for tiny scraps of affection from people who actively despised me. Now, I was sitting at a table full of people who actually chose to love me. I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of peace that I had never experienced in my entire life. I was happy. I was genuinely, undeniably, completely happy. I had a good job, a safe home where nobody was watching me, and a chosen family. The terrible nightmares completely stopped. I stopped checking my rearview mirror. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I had won the war, not by seeking petty revenge or fighting in court, but by successfully removing myself from their toxic battlefield entirely. I assumed my past was completely buried and that I would never hear the names of my parents or my brother ever again. But the universe, as it turns out, has a very dark, very specific, and highly ironic sense of humor. The final chapter of this story wasn't written by me. It was written by karma. 9 full, incredibly peaceful months had passed since I completely cut contact and moved across the country. My life was steady, secure, and wonderfully uneventful. It was a crisp, totally normal Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk at the design agency, drinking a hot cup of coffee and reviewing a new marketing campaign on my monitor, when my cell phone buzzed. I casually glanced at the screen. It was an email notification. My stomach did a sudden, violent drop. It was sent to a very old, secondary email address I had used back in high school for spam and junk mail, one I hadn't thought to delete because I simply never used it anymore. The sender's name was my father's younger sister, my aunt. I stared at the subject line for a full, agonizing minute before my finger moved to click it. It simply read, "Urgent family news." I took a slow, deep breath, bracing myself for another wave of harassment, another bizarre legal threat, or maybe another video of them burning something else I loved. I clicked open the email and read the short block of text. "I know you don't want to talk to anyone, but you need to know this. 3 weeks ago, David collapsed suddenly at his office. They rushed him to the hospital. He has been diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. The doctors say it's extremely aggressive and inoperable. He doesn't have much time left. Your parents are completely devastated. Please consider calling them." I sat perfectly still in my ergonomic office chair. The low hum of the air conditioner and the cheerful chatter of my coworkers in the hallway seemed to fade into total, ringing static. Pancreatic cancer. Terminal. David. We had absolutely zero family history of cancer on either side of our bloodline. David was a rigorous fitness fanatic in his late 20s who ran 10 miles a day, drank organic protein shakes, and treated his body like an absolute temple. It made absolutely no medical or logical sense. It was a complete, random, devastating biological anomaly. A death sentence handed down from the sky. I sat there and I actively waited for the wave of grief to hit me. I waited to feel the expected, culturally mandated sadness that you are supposed to feel when you find out your own older brother is dying. I waited for the heavy guilt to wash over me for not being there. But nothing came. The emotional well was completely, utterly dry. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, quiet indifference. I didn't reply to my aunt's email. I didn't pick up the phone to call my parents to offer my condolences. I just deleted the email, permanently erased the message from my trash folder, and went exactly back to reviewing my marketing campaign. My workday continued exactly as it had an hour before. 2 months later, In late April, another brief email slipped through the cracks to that same old address. It was from the same aunt. It was only 2 sentences long. David passed away last night in hospice care. The funeral will be on Saturday. He was dead. The man who had hacked my life, who had placed a camera in my bathroom to watch me shower, who had successfully convinced my parents to burn my belongings and hold my identity hostage, was permanently gone from this earth. Whatever highly coordinated campaign of harassment his buddies and my parents' church friends had been keeping up online immediately stopped. The moment they found out he was terminally ill, they entirely lost interest in trying to destroy me. They had to face the brutal, horrifying reality of watching their perfect golden boy wither away and die in agonizing pain. I obviously did not attend the funeral. I didn't send expensive flowers. I didn't send a sympathy card. I spent that exact Saturday hiking a beautiful mountain trail with Marcus and my new friends, breathing in the crisp air and laughing until the sun went down. A few weeks after the funeral, I received a thick, certified letter forwarded from my old address. It was from a corporate lawyer representing my parents. They were officially reaching out. With David gone, I was suddenly their only living child. The letter contained vague, overly formal language about wanting to reconnect and heal the past. But it also subtly mentioned the massive inheritance, the remains of his bloated college fund, and a life insurance policy David had left behind, heavily implying that if I came back into the fold, that money would eventually be mine. They honestly thought money could buy back the son they threw into the fire. They thought a massive inheritance could magically erase the fact that they chose a monster over their own flesh and blood. I took the lawyer's letter, walked directly into my kitchen, and dropped it straight into my trash can. I didn't even bother to shred it. I am not going to sit here and tell you that I am a perfect, saintly person. I am not going to lie to you and say that his cancer magically fixed all of my problems or that I am suddenly enlightened and full of forgiveness. But I will tell you the absolute, honest truth. When I found out he died, I was glad. I felt bad about having that dark thought for maybe a day or two, but then I stopped feeling guilty. I don't believe in karma in the traditional sense. I don't believe that good things only happen to good people, because the world is far too random and cruel for that. But in this one specific, highly isolated scenario, the universe stepped in and delivered the ultimate, brutal justice that the legal system refused to give me. The universe threw me one massive freebie, and I am going to appreciate it for the rest of my life. I honestly feel completely free. My parents have to live the rest of their miserable lives sitting in an empty house, surrounded by the ashes of the son they destroyed, mourning the son that destroyed them. I hope they rot in that house, and I do not feel a single ounce of guilt about saying that. They are the broken ones. I am not. I survived their fire, and I built a completely beautiful life out of the ashes. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It's not an easy one to tell, but it's the truth. I hope this resonated with you in some way, especially if you have ever felt like the black sheep in your own family. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, where you had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you? If you made it all the way to the very end of this video, you are part of a very special group. I call it the 1% Club. I want you to go down into the comments right now and type the letter W. That W stands for winner. It is our secret signal to recognize the winners, the amazing people who stuck through the darkness to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Let me know you're a winner. Please don't forget to hit that like button and follow the channel. We are building a community here, and I can't wait to share the next story with you. Take care of yourselves, and remember, your peace is worth protecting.